cramped, dimly lit house in one of Iraq's most volatile regions. Sand and dust clog the air, and a sense of impending danger hovers at every threshold. Gunfire erupts in the darkness, bullets snapping past in rapid succession, and allies shout to be heard over the chaos. In that very moment, Mike Day, a Navy SEAL known for both his unmatched dedication and quiet composure, takes more than 24 bullets in the span of a few seconds. Despite the crushing force of his injuries, he continues the fight, brings down 4 attackers, and hauls a wounded teammate to safety. His refusal to give up, even while bleeding profusely, baffles many who wonder what secret ingredient allows a person to endure so much pain. Some credit survival instincts or rigorous elite training. Others believe a deeper, unbreakable will fueled his resolve. Whichever it was, that fateful event in Fallujah became a defining chapter in the extraordinary story of Mike Day, who rose to heroic heights in public view, while also grappling with a profound and intensely private struggle. To understand what shaped Mike Day into the person who could survive an impossible situation, we have to step back and look at where he came from. Born in 1969, he grew up in a fairly disciplined environment. According to those who knew him, his early childhood wasn't filled with dramatic or extraordinary episodes that you might see in a typical Hollywood backstory. Instead, he was simply a scrappy kid from a typical American upbringing, navigating the usual push and pull of adolescent life, learning that if he wanted something, he'd have to work hard for it. He was drawn to the idea of service and duty from a young age, not necessarily through any single life-altering moment, but rather through the slow accumulation of influences, respect for the military, admiration for those who dedicate their lives to a higher cause, and a personal hunger to test his physical and mental boundaries. It's said he had a quiet but unmistakable intensity about him, the kind of boy who didn't back down from a challenge, whether it was a sports competition or defending a friend. After finishing high school, Mike made the life-changing decision to join the United States Navy. The allure of challenge within the Navy SEAL program was especially tempting to someone who never seemed to be satisfied with the ordinary. The SEALs were, and still are, renowned for their relentless training pipelines designed to push each candidate to the brink, both physically and mentally. In that environment, he found people who shared his drive, his unyielding sense of discipline, and a willingness to go beyond their limits. Many never finished the so-called Hell Week, an infamous stretch in Bud S training, where sleep is practically non-existent, and the body and mind are tested to the edge of collapse. Yet Mike Day survived, forging the mental toughness that would later define his life or death moments. Graduating with Bud's Class 164, he stepped into the ranks of the SEAL teams, prepared for the demands of special operations missions around the globe. These experiences shaped him quietly. In the early years of his career, Mike found camaraderie among his fellow SEALs that went beyond the bonds of typical colleagues. They weren't just men in uniform. They were a band of brothers who entrusted their lives to each other. He learned to rely on them, and they learned to rely on him, forging a trust that only grows from adversity. When he was first deployed overseas, he encountered real combat for the first time, moments that were chaotic and terrifying, yet fueled by a sense of purpose that hardened his resolve. He never bragged about what he saw or did. Like many special operators, he rarely volunteered details, but he stored each lesson deep within, a mental encyclopedia of experiences that showed him exactly how brutal and unpredictable warfare could be. But no amount of training or early deployments could have completely prepared him for Iraq at the height of its turbulence. By the mid-2000s, Iraq was a cauldron of insurgent activity, sectarian violence, and volatile danger around every corner. It was a war with no clean front lines, urban environments, hidden bombs, and pockets of heavily armed militants capable of ambush at any time. The Navy SEALs often found themselves at the forefront of high-risk missions, from capturing high-value targets to gathering critical intelligence. Mike's unit was among those elite operators tasked with stepping into the lion's den to root out threats, particularly in hotspots like Fallujah, which had gained a fearsome reputation for its heavy insurgent presence. By 2007, the mission tempo was relentless, and every operation carried with it a sense of impending peril. For Mike, leading or being part of these raids was as standard as it could get for a SEAL in wartime, though there's nothing truly standard about raids on houses suspected of harboring terrorists. Fallujah itself was battered from intense fighting over the previous few years, and while major offensives had reduced some insurgent strongholds, pockets of violent resistance remained. Intelligence suggested one particular house was being used by members of al-Qaeda as a weapons stash and operational planning site. The mission was straightforward on paper: breach, clear, secure. The subtlety and nuance, though, made it extremely risky. The building's layout was unknown, the number of occupants was unknown, and the entire scenario was prone to deadly surprises. On that fateful day, Mike led his team into the structure. They entered swiftly and methodically, each man knowing his lane of fire, each movement orchestrated in split-second sequences they had drilled countless times. But the insurgents were waiting, well armed with AK-47s and prepared to defend their position. The hallway was cramped. Noisy confusion echoed off the concrete walls as muzzle flashes lit the darkness like strobe lights. In the chaos, Mike suddenly felt a series of sharp impacts, one after another, as if someone was hammering him from multiple angles. Bullets ripped into him at terrifyingly close range. The ballistic plates in his vest caught some, but others tore through unprotected flesh. Many times someone wounded like that would simply drop, physically overwhelmed. But Mike stayed upright, fueled by adrenaline, training, and that intangible force within him. He kept shooting. In the span of about a minute, though it must have felt like an eternity, he was hit 27 times. 11 bullets penetrated his body. 16 more struck his vest or equipment. Despite that hurricane of gunfire, he managed to neutralize 4 insurgents. Then, in a moment that can only be described as surreal, he realized one of his teammates was injured and a hostage was inside. He dragged himself to the comrade, adrenaline surging through his veins, and guided him outside to safety, ensuring the team and the hostage made it out. When backup forces finally came, they found Mike barely standing, covered in blood, and dangerously close to collapsing. The medics were stunned he was alive. By all logic, he shouldn't have been. According to later accounts, doctors insisted that sheer willpower played a significant role in keeping him going. Some observers have joked that he must have been part superhero, part medical marvel, yet even that doesn't do justice to the complexity of what he endured. The bullets that found their mark caused injuries to his abdomen, arms, legs, and body cavities. One round reportedly came so close to his femoral artery that if it had sliced it open, he could have bled out within minutes. Another bullet grazed his lung, a fraction of an inch from puncturing it completely. It was a tapestry of near-fatal injuries, held together by the intangible threads of determination and expert combat medicine. That moment became a defining anecdote in SEAL lore, something whispered about with awe and respect. But for Mike himself, survival was only the beginning of a long road, one that would take years of surgeries, physical therapy, mental health counseling, and a level of perseverance that many do not see. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of life-saving interventions, countless hours in surgery, transfusions, pain management. The physical consequences were daunting: broken bones, nerve damage, possible organ complications. In the short term, the medical team's goal was simply to keep him alive. But as the weeks turned into months, the quiet battles began taking shape. Physical therapy was excruciating, especially with so many bullet wounds, each leaving behind scars, internal and external. Simple tasks like walking or lifting an arm could feel like scaling a mountain. Yet it was not just the physical scars that weighed heavily on Mike. Psychological trauma had latched onto him. War leaves no mind unscathed, and his near-death experience, combined with an accumulated exposure to combat, carved deep emotional channels that manifested as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Nightmares would jolt him awake, memories replayed on an endless loop, and a lingering hypervigilance made everyday life feel fraught with hidden threats. It's a common story among veterans who served in high-intensity combat. That primal survival state that kept him alive in Fallujah also made it difficult to adjust back to a normal routine. In his daily life, crowds might trigger anxiety. Sudden loud noises could send a shock through his system, and a sense of detachment could bubble to the surface in personal relationships. Over the coming years, he underwent a roller coaster of treatment modalities. Some days were good. He felt optimistic, determined. Other days, the darkness was so overwhelming that he wondered if any measure of therapy could dim the echoes of gunfire and the sight of muzzle flashes in his mind. But in the midst of this struggle, Mike discovered a renewed sense of purpose. Realizing many veterans faced similar demons, he became an outspoken advocate for mental health awareness and PTSD treatment. He wasn't about to hide his battles or appear invulnerable just because he was a Navy SEAL. On the contrary, he felt duty-bound to shine a light on these issues, especially because the stoic culture of elite military units can sometimes discourage open discussion of mental health. People who encountered Mike in these post-service years often describe him as an unlikely motivational speaker. He wasn't flashy or bombastic. Rather, he spoke with a raw sincerity that resonated with countless listeners. He told audiences about the pain, about the moment he thought he was dying, about carrying the weight of invisible wounds, all to let them know there was no shame in admitting one needed help. He emphasized that real strength was found not in trying to ignore trauma, but in confronting it head-on, seeking healing, and supporting others in their journeys. That honesty endeared him to veterans and civilians alike. In a world where heroism is often romanticized, Mike's vulnerability stood out as both refreshing and deeply human. Eventually, he wrote a memoir titled Perfectly Wounded, detailing his life story, the harrowing firefight, and the personal battles that followed. The book was received warmly by many in the military community, who saw their own reflections in his words. He also began speaking at events, conferences, and on various media platforms, sharing not only the shocking details of being shot 27 times, but also the more profound, lingering aspects of survival, the depression, anxiety, and sense of dislocation when everyday life no longer made sense. The unwavering courage he displayed on the battlefield extended to his approach in telling the truth about PTSD. He helped raise awareness for CETA comprehensive care, championed the importance of therapy, and urged veterans to reach out instead of suffering in silence. Yet, as his profile grew, so did the complexities of being in the public eye. Some critics, though relatively few, doubted the bullet count or questioned the sensational nature of his story. Was it truly 27? Had he counted the bullet holes in his body armor and vest as well? Did that inflate the drama? Others wondered if the story overshadowed broader topics or if the attention might sensationalize one man's experience over the shared sufferings of many. Mike, however, usually addressed these doubts with calm composure, referring to his medical records and official after-action reports that documented the event. The weight of the evidence left little room for serious dispute. The firefight was very much real, and the injuries were beyond severe. For him, the exact number was secondary to the real point, that countless veterans suffer unimaginable trauma, and whether it's one bullet or dozens, the aftermath of survival can be equally challenging to navigate. Most people, of course, embraced Mike's experiences as both inspirational and tragic, a demonstration of the astonishing feats of which the human spirit is capable, and the sobering realities that come after. The recollection of him walking under his own power out of that house, riddled with wounds, became a symbol of resilience that circulated widely. Over time, Mike was asked to appear on news segments, talk shows, and was interviewed for various podcasts that focus on military experiences, leadership, and overcoming adversity. Even those with little direct connection to the military found themselves captivated by his sincerity and the rawness of his story. Yet behind the scenes, Mike's struggles didn't vanish. Mental health challenges don't simply disappear, even when you've dedicated your life to confronting them. The physical scars healed into toughened flesh, but the emotional scars could be aggravated by daily stress, memories, or personal disappointments. PTSD is notorious for its ebb and flow, and often it might recede for a time, leading one to believe it's under control, only to resurface with devastating intensity. For some, that battle can become too much to endure, even when they appear strong or seemingly have it all together on the surface. Tragically, in 2023, Mike Day passed away by his own hand. His death sent shock waves through the special operations community, where he was revered both as a warrior and as a champion for wounded veterans. Many who heard the news struggled to understand how a man who endured so much physically could lose his life to the silent torment that had been gnawing at him for years. It was a harsh reminder that PTSD and mental health challenges can remain lethal adversaries long after the bullets have stopped flying. His suicide underscored the critical need for continued support, open dialogue, and robust mental health services for those who serve and sacrifice. The ripple effect was immediate. His memorials were filled with heartfelt messages from fellow SEALs, other service members, friends, and strangers who had been touched by his story. They spoke of his unwavering kindness, his sense of humor, despite the darkness, and the gentleness in his voice when he addressed sensitive topics like trauma or moral injury. They recalled how he used to sign copies of his book for people, not just scribbling his name, but adding a personal note, encouraging them to keep pushing forward in their own struggles. It was impossible not to feel the profound heartbreak that accompanied his passing. After everything he gave on the battlefield, in his advocacy, in his attempts to help others heal, he was ultimately unable to escape the shadows in his own mind. In the days and weeks that followed, the media re-aired interviews and podcasts featuring Mike. One of the most striking aspects was the consistency of his message about hope, resilience, and the importance of leaning on your community when life feels overwhelming. In many ways, he had spent his final years telling us exactly how dangerous untreated or undertreated PTSD can be. He had tried to bring us into the conversation, urging society at large to break down stigmas and build better systems of care. This very message that he championed became all the more haunting in light of his untimely death. It drew renewed attention to the fact that mental health is not a linear journey and that each person's struggle can be unique and unpredictable. To fully appreciate the weight of Mike's story, We also need to consider the larger context in which he lived. The post 9/11 generation of veterans experienced continuous deployments, often rotating in and out of combat zones multiple times. Fallujah, Ramadi, Baghdad, these names evoke powerful memories of street-by-street fighting and close-quarters combat. Many of these veterans came home to a country that struggled to understand the depth of their experiences. While there was widespread support and patriotic gratitude, the practical realities of mental health care and reintegration didn't always match the scale of what they had been through. This broader cultural backdrop intensifies Mike's story, placing it within a generation that found itself engaged in protracted conflicts, sometimes with unclear or shifting goals, but always with deeply personal consequences. Within the community of Navy SEALs, there are private debates about the cost of repeated deployments. While these men are among the most prepared for war, they are still human, subject to exhaustion and emotional wear and tear. The stoic, high-performing culture that fosters incredible heroism can also isolate individuals when they begin to unravel. Mike Day's life illuminated both extremes. At one end, the near mythical resilience that allowed him to push back against death itself in that Fallujah house. At the other, the heartbreak of a man who could not entirely escape the haunting echoes of war, no matter how bravely he tried. Those who analyze his story from a historical or military perspective see multiple angles. One perspective celebrates him as a testament to the effectiveness of advanced combat training, the protective gear that saved his life, and the skillful medical response that followed. Another perspective explores the moral and psychological burden that modern wars impose on individual soldiers, especially in counterinsurgency operations where the lines between enemy and civilian can be blurry. Mike's story can be seen as a microcosm of the bigger narrative about the complexities of these wars, the intense heroism and sacrifice on one hand, and the lingering, deeply personal costs on the other. It's also important to realize that Mike's decision to speak openly about his PTSD, to write a book, and to address large audiences made him something of a public figure. That status wasn't always easy. He carried expectations. People saw him as the ultimate symbol of survival and strength. Perhaps at times the gap between that public perception of invincibility and his private reality of ongoing struggles weighed heavily on him. The discrepancy between the unstoppable SEAL and the human being who woke up every day grappling with nightmares can be a very lonely place. He was in some ways a hero to thousands, yet behind closed doors he was still a person who felt isolated and haunted. In interviews he gave in his later years, Mike would often recount how it felt to see the bullet holes in his body. He talked about the immense gratitude he had for the people who rushed to his aid, from the medics who stabilized him on the ground to the surgeons who patched him up. He spoke of faith and how he believed it played a role in his survival. He never appeared to be grandstanding. It was more of a measured humility, a willingness to share the awe he felt at still being alive after so many close calls. That vulnerability drew people to him. It also served as a stark contrast to the typical Hollywood portrayal of a hardened special operator. He showed that you could be both unstoppable on the battlefield and deeply vulnerable in the quiet of your own mind. One of the lesser-known anecdotes rarely mentioned in mainstream coverage came from a nurse who treated him during his recovery. She recalled how in his early days at the hospital, when the pain was excruciating and he could barely move, he would crack jokes with the staff, telling them he still owed them push-ups for every day he was stuck in a bed. It was an endearing sign of his fighting spirit, a small window into the irreverent camaraderie that keeps people in high-stress professions going. Though he was heavily medicated and in intense pain, he found moments to lighten the atmosphere for those around him. That small detail stuck with the nurse for years. How a man in that state could show gratitude and humor, drawing on an internal well of resilience even when the odds were stacked against him. In the broader debate about how history will remember men like Mike Day, there's recognition that modern warfare's complexities create a narrative that blends extraordinary bravery with equally extraordinary vulnerability. The old stereotypes of the stoic soldier have given way to a more nuanced understanding, thanks in part to individuals like him who stepped forward to share the burdens of mental health challenges. In many ways, he helped pave a path for others to acknowledge their own pain without shame. His life is often hailed as a testament to resiliency, but his death serves as a stark reminder that resiliency is not an infinite resource. Despite the best of intentions, support networks, and coping strategies, the toll can still be too heavy. For viewers hearing this story, it's natural to wonder, how should we honor this complex legacy? Is Mike Day remembered primarily for surviving 27 bullets, or for how he tried to help others with PTSD, or for his final act of despair that ended it all? The truth is that he is all of these things, a testament to the multifaceted nature of life. He was a warrior whose unbreakable determination saved lives in a dusty Iraqi house, a survivor who spent years rebuilding and reimagining who he was away from the battlefield, and a vulnerable soul who, despite a heroic reputation, ultimately succumbed to an internal battle too heavy to carry. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.